Hello and welcome to the first City of Mesa Community of Colors Forum. Today, we hope to have a meaningful and productive discussion with members of our African American community here in the City of Mesa, as well as our Police Chief Ken Kost, who is joining me in the Channel 11 studios here at the City building. I think our whole city and our whole country has been devastated by the impacts of the death of George Floyd and the horrific event that we all experienced in watching that, but also the conversation and the anger that it has sparked in our community. We are anxious to give a voice to that conversation, and I'm very pleased that we have members of our African American community with us today for us to hear from and to ask questions of the Chief of Police, Ken Kost, and myself. And hopefully to give air to a lot of the feelings that we're feeling as a community and as a nation. Like I said, we're here to listen, but also to share what we are doing in the City of Mesa to be responsive to the feeling that I think we're all experiencing of what we can do to dismantle the infrastructure of discrimination and the cause of the angst and the fear and the anger that we're seeing in our community and across the nation. As I indicated, we're honored to have some wonderful members of our African American community with us today to have that conversation with. I'd like to thank them for their participation and introduce them now. We're pleased to have Pastor Juan Brown from the Progressive Baptist Church here in Mesa. Mr. Roy Tatum, who is the East Valley NAACP president. Judge Elisa Sears, who is the West Mesa Justice Court, Justice of the Peace. Reverend Ozetta Kirby with the Holy Trinity Community African Methodist Episcopal Church. And Mr. Ron Williams, who is Mesa's Human Relations Advisory Board and a very active member of our community and very involved in particular in the African American community. And as I indicated earlier, it's my pleasure to have with us our great police chief, Mr. Ken Kost, who was recently named our permanent police chief after a long career of service in the Mesa Police Department, literally having every position in the department and serving as our assistant chief most recently. Again, thanks for being here today, ladies and gentlemen. Our format today is to give each of our panelists some opportunities to share what's on their mind and what's in their heart. We are anxious to hear that and to listen to that, and we'll be taking careful notes. But then also, we're anxious to have a conversation and to ask some questions of our police chief so that we can share information that I think everyone is anxious to hear in our community. So we're going to begin with Pastor Brown. As I indicated earlier, Pastor Brown is a pastor at the Progressive Baptist Church, and he's been in that position for more than 25 years. In addition to pastoring that church, he's also well known for being very engaged in our community. So, Pastor Brown, thank you for being with us today. Let's begin with having you give us some perspective from where you're at on what you're seeing and what you're experiencing.
Certainly. Let me first of all say thank you for inviting me to be a part of the Community of Colors Forum today. It would be remiss of me if I did not acknowledge today that we are memorializing our brother George Floyd in Minnesota today as a member of the Black community, as a member of the clergy in this state for some 27 odd years. As a member of the African American Christian Clergy Coalition of Arizona and a member of the East Valley NAACP, of which I am proud to say that I am a part of, we give honor to George Floyd's life and his legacy today. Also today, the other three officers involved in the brutal killing of George Floyd will make their first appearance in court today on second-degree murder charges. George Floyd was not resisting. He was accused of something. He was accused of, I can't even remember what it was. It has been so impactful. His death has been so impactful on me. But police were called, and from the onset, he was treated as we are normally handled by police in our Black and brown community, with savagery and without any provocation from George Floyd when they pulled up on him and attempted to get him out of the vehicle. 3 officers pinned him to the ground, handcuffed, with the weight of all 3 officers on his back and neck, to my understanding, for 8 minutes, 47 seconds, killing George Floyd in front of the entire world. And of course, one officer held a crowd of concerned citizens back from wanting to help Brother George, and they couldn't, lest they run into the risk of being arrested and accosted themselves. I am here today, certainly again by way of invite, but here today to hopefully spend some time, and I'm going to be very specific with this, to spend some time talking about bad cops in our police organization. When they violate the civil rights of people, when they abuse their authority, when they kill our citizens. I am well aware that what we do on a legislative level will be a course we will have to run for quite some time now. But there are things that we can do today on an organizational and local level, right now, today, to weed out bad cops. And I'm not talking about after 18 some odd complaints and or more that are in the jacket of police officers currently patrolling our streets and perhaps even in leadership areas. To weed these bad cops out and to prevent such a monstrous culture from persisting within the police department. I'm going to say this, and it's not to take away from any efforts that, in particular, the city of Mesa have made to improve matters. I've been a part of a number of the meetings and trainings to observe the effort that has been made by police chiefs, even our current one, Ken Cost, and leadership. But overall, I want to say, and the death of George Floyd gives us great indication that police departments yet and still are missing the mark and not doing enough to manage officers. And if it is appropriate for me at this time to ask a question or two, and as simple as the question may seem, and as basic as it may be, I still want to ask the question, who were those officers that pulled up and accosted our brother George Floyd? I really want to know from the mayor as well as from our own police chief, who do you say are police accountable to? Who were these officers accountable to per their training and understanding when they hit the streets? I know that there's an academy class getting ready to graduate. are they aware of who they are accountable to? Because oftentimes you'll hear police officers say, and here's the reason why I'm asking this very basic question, because officers will oftentimes say, they don't work for us, and they don't have to answer to us. And that is exactly the way they carry themselves and conduct themselves. So I would like a clear-cut answer, again, as basic as it may seem. Who are police officers accountable to? Are they accountable to the people as well, not just to their supervisors or their leadership? Who would you say, who can you say are police accountable to, Chief?
Thank you, Pastor Brown. And let me just introduce the Chief. One of your positions previously, Chief, has been to be in charge of the training that our police officers receive in the city of Mesa. So this is an excellent question. What are we training our police officers with regard to the obligation that they feel, the accountability that they feel to the community?
Yeah, Pastor Brown, great question. First of all, thoughts and prayers go out to the family of George Floyd. And I want to say this because I want to answer your question direct, and I know we've talked an awful lot in the past. We're accountable to the people and the Constitution, first and foremost. When we raise our hand and we get this badge pinned on us, we swear an oath. So that's first and foremost for our officers, and that does start in training. It does start at the academy. We have a code of conduct that's a very black and white code of conduct, what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. And we certainly have a duty to act within our training program, not only during the academy, but even post-academy. And our expectations is that the officers follow those policies and procedures. Can I guarantee you it's done perfectly every time? Of course not. But we are very serious, and we take that to a serious level, starting with the academy, meaning we don't just train from a lesson plan and read off what our officers are expected to do. We do scenario-based training to where when officers are applying force or they're doing something or they're handling a call, if things are going contrary to policy from what another officer may be doing, it's our training and it's our expectation and our policy that they have a duty to act, meaning that they intervene. And if they don't, they're going to fail that scenario. And there's a possibility that they fail out of the police academy if they fail that scenario. So we take it a step further from a lesson plan to physical training and then ongoing training for our officers that's on a regular calendar. So I hope that answered your question as far as that, Pastor Brown, as far as our expectation for what our officers are expected to do out in the field. And as far as accountability, it's the public. We're public servants. And so we push that quite a bit, not only through our policies and our training, our messaging. So that's first and foremost, and then it is to supervision. And we have and I know this question will come up later, so I'll yield to a question later about our use of force policy and the way that we hold officers accountable and how that works. But we have a very robust system in place to do just that.
Chief, I want to be clear on something I think I heard you say a moment ago. As part of the training that Mesa police officers receive is that if they see another officer engaging in misconduct, they have an affirmative obligation to correct that? Because the perception, I think, is oftentimes that police officers have each other's back and that there's this blue shield and that they protect each other. What is the official policy of the police department, and how are officers trained in that regard?
They're trained that if they're seeing misconduct, if you want to put it in a use of force scenario where there's force being used, where an officer is uncomfortable and sees that it's against our policy, it's their duty to act. And if they don't act, they can be held accountable and have been held accountable for failing to act. And it's part of our it's part of our code of conduct. Our code of conduct is specifies a lot of different things, but that's just one of them. And then we reinforce that with scenario-based training beyond even what Arizona Post standards, which is our police officer standards and training, even require us to do. We go into more hours of training to go beyond what's expected.
Great. Pastor Brown, was that responsive to your question?
Certainly, it is. Let me just ask one more question. So, is it specifically, and again, it's related to code of conduct towards the public, towards the community, and certainly the answer you informed me greatly. Is it specifically written, and are officers trained, and in fact, are they made abreast, or is there refresher training for officers to be reminded of how they are to treat the community? And if they are accountable to us, it's just amazing to me that officers conduct themselves in a way and are even brazen enough to say that they're not accountable to us and they don't work for us, when the fact is that they do. But is there something specific? Are there policies written down? Let's take, for instance, the use of profanity and obscenity and cursing at people. And I'm not talking about in a combative scenario. I'm talking about just everyday scenarios. What is the policy, if any, with the use of profanity and obscenity towards community members? And is it specifically told to police officers in the academy, and even those who have been on the streets for some years? Are they reminded of these this code of conduct in some way, shape, form, or fashion, whether it's in briefing, whether it's in a specific training? Is there anything like that?
Yes, Pastor Brown, there is. So in our policy, you absolutely, whether it's being rude, using insolent language, using foul language, that's all against our policy. And if we have an officer, for example, that says, we don't work for you, and they're being rude and they're saying something to that effect, we want to hear about it. And we've set up, the way our complaint system is you just simply go online, right on the left side, you'll see file a complaint, and you can also file when an officer's doing something well. You can do either or. So we've set that up. So that's on the accountability side, because I know I want to get to the other half of the question. As far as continue officer training, we don't just give them the training in the academy and then it stops, because officers now that get hired are going to do a minimum of 25 years to get their, to go through a full career. So it is a continuum of training that goes out. And so it's more than just, firearms and some of the proficiencies, whether it's driving. It is also our use of force training, our code of conduct, our ethics, all those things that they get in the academy. It's a reoccurring calendar. For example, we do de-escalation training. So that training has everything to do with communication and how to communicate with the public and how to create time and distance to calm situations down. We do that every 2 years. And it's planned every 2 years from this point until I'll be long gone. And that's in place. So it doesn't matter what supervisor comes on board, which chief comes in next. It's in policy, so it's embedded. So it's part of what we do, and it's part of our culture. So that's real important that we have that continued officer education.
Great. Thank you, Chief. We want to move on now. And again, thank you, Pastor Brown. We hope to hear from you again later during this discussion. But I'd like to introduce Mr. Roy Tatum. Mr. Tatum, as I indicated earlier, is the president of the East Valley NAACP. He's a big part of our community at every community event. Mr. Tatum is there. He's always been an outspoken advocate of the African American community in Mesa, not shy about letting myself and the City Council know when he has concerns. Roy, thank you for that, playing that important role as an advocate in our community. We're anxious to hear what your thoughts are at this point.
Well, and thank you for including me in this important discussion. And I echo the sentiments of Pastor Brown. So thank you, Chief Cost, for speaking to those issues. I have a number of questions that I would like to ask, and I will ask them. I will make my statement and also include my questions in my statement, because I believe that not only is the African American community concerned about the state of policing, but all of America is concerned about the state of policing. And I know that things have to change you know that things have to change. And what we need to realize, understand, is that we all have to work together to implement that change, whether we're talking incremental change or some sweeping changes. And I've been a part of many discussions with the city of Mesa and the Mesa Police Department and in some of the changes that you all have made. Mayor Giles, we've been together in some very tense situations within the city of Mesa. So I want to localize my conversation while honoring the memory and the life of George Floyd and many others that have lost their lives as a result of police violence. We know that there have been issues locally. So I want to speak to the Mesa Police Department, the use of force policy, what changes have been made, what changes can we expect to be made given the incidents that have happened over the last week or so. How is Mesa Police Department adjusting themselves to that? I also want to talk about culture, because we understand training, we understand policy, we understand what's written in black and white, but we also understand culture. And culture pretty much means this is, regardless of what's written on paper, culture is how things are done. So how, Chief Costa, you intend to address the culture within policing to make sure that they follow the rules, regulations, and guidelines that's set forth, and we prevent a subculture of rogue police officers to do what they want to do in the streets, and not adhere to the written rules, laws, policies, and regulations that are set forth before them. Finally, I want to talk about consequences and penalties for the police that violate the rules, the codes, regulations. What are the penalties? And do you, and Chief Cost, are you able to directly receive complaints? Because some people don't want to speak to the police because they don't trust it. They're afraid. They don't want to expose themselves in that type of way. So are they able to anonymously make a complaint or ask a question or provide information? Many people don't want to come down to the department to file a formal complaint. So I just want to talk about the process, the culture, and what changes can we expect to see from the Mesa Police Department. I'll stop here and let you answer.
Okay, all great questions. And with the amount of time we have, Roy, whatever I don't get to, I'll call you, we'll set up, because there's a lot to it, right? You asked a lot of very good questions. Let me start out with, I'll go out of order a little bit. Let me start out with culture. I believe, and I've always believed, that culture starts from the top. It starts from leadership. It starts from not just the position of chief of police, but it starts all the way out throughout the organization, all the way down to our first line supervisors. And we have something on the side of our cars. It's called leadership and public safety, because leadership is a big deal to me. So our officers that are getting ready to graduate the academy, they are leaders in the community. And so we push that down for accountability, and then back up and down to make sure that they understand where I come from, what the core values I have, not only as a person, but as a public servant, and that's shared with my team and my staff, and all the way down. We set the tone. Leadership sets the tone, and I think that you're all leaders in the community, and you understand that, and you're leaders in your own regard, but people are gonna look at you for that tone. And you can't change culture until there's belief in that leadership. And so that's where that starts. And I could go on and on about that. So let me go to what have we been doing for use of force. And you brought up kind of the incidents of a couple years ago. And it's more than just a couple years ago. It's ongoing look into our policies and our procedures and what we're doing. And for every chief that I've worked for, I've seen a commitment in that regard. Over the past couple years, we have invited different entities to come in and look at our organization that have nothing to do with the Mesa Police Department. They don't owe us anything. They're not tied to law enforcement, like the Police Executive Research Forum, which is a national think tank. They have their own credibility and their own regard. Bring them in, let them look at our policies, and they did a thorough review of everything we do around use of force, around related policies, around discipline, Roy. Every policy got looked at, and they gave us a 66 recommendation document. It's quite a big document. It's online. It's available for you to see on our website, and I can talk you through that a little bit later. But on June 25th, we're going to talk. We're going to have a forum, a meeting that we already had planned, and then COVID kind of moved it, where we open up that process. And for those recommendations, we put a committee together. And then normally when you get recommendations like that as a department, you sit with your staff and you come up with policy changes. That's kind of the norm. That's our culture. What we did in this case is those 66 recommendations for use of force and related policies, we put a committee together of our community, academic, the academic community, and our subject matter experts, so the officers, to sit in a room every other Tuesday, and Reverend Kirby, you could speak to this when it gets to your side to maybe talk about this particular process because you've been part of it, to open up our policies and to provide feedback and recommendations that are beneficial for the police department and give our community a voice in what our policy changes are going to be. And that process has been going on for 9 months. It goes all the way through to the assistant chiefs and chiefs of police, and then we approve or adopt those recommendations. And the community had everything significantly to do with that. And so that's the process that we open up for our use of force. As far as the complaint process, yes, anonymous complaints are welcome. You can go online. There's a link on how to make a complaint. You can do it both anonymously, and you can do it with your name and information for follow-up. You can call our non-emergency line to do a complaint and give the specifics. And it's in our policy to follow up on every single complaint, and we have a process in place for that, Roy. And as far as the penalties and the discipline, that's a very complex issue. I think for the sake of time, I will probably defer that to another conversation, but it's a great question, and it will be part of what we're doing June 25th, which will go up on our website here pretty soon. And of course, the whole public is invited to come see what we've been doing to our policies. And this has been at least a 2-year process, and there's been a lot of significant change in how we do business.
Roy, do you mind if I add a piggyback to your question? Because, Chief, when we were talking about specifically the use of force policies of the Mesa Police Department, as I've watched news coverage of some of the protesters that we've seen, a reoccurring theme is the sign, "I can't breathe," which, of course, we've heard far too often, in these types of cases. Specifically, are there Mesa Police Department policies? Well, what are the Mesa Police Department policies, use of force policies, with regard to chokeholds, the type of scenario that we've seen unfold in other communities?
Good question, Mayor. So there is a difference. I don't want to take too long on this, but I want to make sure to explain this. There's a difference between a chokehold and a carotid restraint. A chokehold, if you put your forearm perpendicular along your throat and you're actually cutting the airway off, is what's called a chokehold. In my 26 years, we've never taught that technique. That cuts the airway off. There's a lot of issues that could come with that. We do not teach that, nor have we taught that in my career. The carotid restraint is different. Carotid is more of a V, and it's putting pressure with your arm on either side of the neck. And that's the only thing we can use. There's some agencies that have used legs and things like that, and we don't authorize that. We don't condone that kind of training. Our carotid, by the way, in the area of use of force for us, is only when deadly force is authorized, meaning that officer is using that technique because their life is in danger and imminent danger, and that's the only thing they have left to do. It's not at a level of force or an escalation of force that's anything but that. So it's an extreme policy for us to have the carotid, and it's trained continually. Every single year the officers get training in it, and we do so because it is such a high-level technique.
Okay, thank you. Roy, was that responsive to your questions?
Yes, it was. And obviously, for this amount of time, I look forward to the follow-up on the penalties and the consequences.
Great.
Sounds good.
Yes, of course, and I think a lot of this conversation is really just going to whet appetite for additional questions, and this is not a one-and-done situation. As I indicated, we'll be having more of these forums in the near future with broader community. So I hope both the panelists and those who are watching at home are recording other questions they might have that we can get to as well. So, Roy, thank you so much for being here and for those great questions. I'd like to now introduce Judge Sears. Judge Sears is another great representative of our diverse community in the city of Mesa. She's a proud product of Mesa Public Schools. Very proud also that she's been elected to be the Justice of the Peace in the West Mesa Justice Court. In addition to being a judge, she's an active social entrepreneur and a nonprofit founder who focuses on issues of food insecurity and education funding. And she's got a famous mother as well, who is also serving on our Mesa School Board that I'm sure will be part of these conversations going forward as well. So, Judge Sears, we're anxious to hear what's in your heart and your mind at this point. I think we might have a little bit of oh, there you go. Judge Sears, you're back with us. I think you just need to unmute your microphone and take it away.
I apologize. My internet has been going in and out the entire time we've been on this call, but I've heard basically everything. So thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate that. And Chief Koss, I haven't seen you since you rose up to your chief position, so congratulations.
Thank you.
This has been a very difficult week, especially as a Black person having a Black family. It really leads us to have those conversations again about what we can do to protect our own safety in the community. I do want to mention that George Floyd's life did not need to be taken. And Pastor Brown earlier, he said he couldn't remember what actually happened. George Floyd was accused of attempting to pass a counterfeit $20 bill. So this is all over $20. It was a policy of the store that if a counterfeit bill was presented, that they were instructed to
I think, unfortunately, Judge Sears' internet connection seems to be failing us right now, so we will, I'm going to anticipate that her question has to do with discipline and with bad cops. Maybe while we wait for her to rejoin us, Chief, you can talk a little bit about the disciplinary process in the city of Mesa and what your constraints are and whether or not you've made progress in that process in the last bit of time.
Yeah, let me talk a little bit about the early warning system. Early warning system is something that perhaps a lot of agencies don't have, but we do. Oh, there she is.
Judge Sears, the chief is talking a little bit about discipline. If you don't mind, we'll let him finish this response and then get back to you asking a question. Is that all right? Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Chief.
So the early warning system is a system that tracks when officers have complaints, whether they're sustained or not sustained. The fact that someone called in a complaint on them gets tracked. If it reaches, a certain threshold, then or any threshold at all, the supervisor is contacted. They're made aware, and then there's a series of accountability steps, whether it's something that could be on the minor end where there's training involved for the officer to fix the things that they're doing. Let's say that it's a performance issue, for example, where we give them training, or something more serious, more egregious, where that training is combined with discipline. And discipline can be everywhere from a written reprimand, which is more than just a write-up you would think of in like a store or something like that. It's a formal document put in their workstation file and their jacket, if you will, and that follows them all the way up to suspension and all the way up to more serious discipline. So we have that early warning system. We have our professional standards in place. We've just made some recent changes in our discipline policy. We do a lot of concurrent investigations, meaning if there's a serious incident, a critical incident, our professional standards will investigate at the same time there's a criminal investigation, so side by side, instead of waiting for the next one to be done. And we do that for efficiency and for the speed of an investigation, because that's the expectation that our public has, and quite frankly, that's the expectation our officers have. To sit around 6 or 7 months for a case to be done is not acceptable. So we've sped that process up to make it more efficient, to add more people and professional standards, to add more training, to shorten that timeline to get some resolution to a complaint.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Judge, I'm sorry for the interruption. Please continue with what you were saying earlier. I'm sorry, we still have you muted. We'll try to unmute you on this end, but if you can do it, there you go.
I got it. I'm unmuted. Did you hear the last thing that I said?
No.
Do you want me to start from the top?
Oh, we did hear you, yes. If you could just, the last, your comments of the last 20 seconds or so we missed. I'm sorry, it looks like we've lost you again. Chief, so as I've become aware of what it takes to become a cadet at the City of Mesa, I'm really very profoundly impressed with the high bar that we set for our cadets. I think it's higher than for other agencies, and being accepted to the Mesa Police Academy is really quite an honor at this point. But I think you were indicating earlier that even though we do a lot of vetting with these cadets, we're still going to somehow, that some folks with the wrong personalities or that are just not compatible to be police officers are going to make their way through. And I think you were describing this process of what do we do when once they're functioning as police officers, we start to notice that the way that they interact with the public or they're, somehow we missed something. Yeah,
it's important because we do have a very, very stringent hiring process. It's one of the most stringent in the state, and I would argue in the country. And then we have the longest training academy in the state, so we add even more hours than what's required to us to do a lot of extra training, whether it's communication skills, whether it's implicit bias, whether it's things that we put our folks through, going back, Roy, to your point, to establish that culture. Now, even with all that training and the field training, we see an officer that's starting to go down a bad road. The way that we have our policy and procedures set up with not only the early warning system, but our expectations and the policies for our sergeants, our first line supervisors, is that they deal with that swiftly through training, through discipline, through corrective action. Sometimes it doesn't have to be formal. It's just getting an officer back on track. And so when or if that happens, we definitely have a robust system in place.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully, Judge Kirby will rejoin us, and we'll continue to hear from her. But in the meantime, let's move to Reverend Ozetta Kirby. Reverend Kirby has been really a pillar of the relationships between the communities of color and the Mesa Police Department for many, many years. Very active in the African American Forum program with the police department. I've been to many events at her church where she hosts bringing law enforcement into the church and working on improving the relationships between the community and the police force. So, Reverend Kirby, thank you for all that you've done in our community. We're anxious to hear your thoughts at this time.
Thank you for inviting me, Mayor. I really have been involved for the last 6 years, and my position is to work with the various police officers in Chandler, Mesa, Gilbert, Scottsdale. And I believe that we really got to know many people that work for the various police departments. And where there have been instances where people felt the injustice of certain police officers, I can tell you from 6 years of experience that the good police officers really outweigh those who you would consider bad. First of all, some of the things that we have done is invite police officers to our church. We have invited the mayor to our church. And I feel that when you're trying to get rid of racism, one of the things that we need to do is get to know members of other cultures. Because when we get to know members of other cultures, it helps us come together when there is a large problem in the city of Mesa. So we have done that. We have invited our Mesa police officers to our Black History program that we have every year. And it's not just your typical Black History program. It is a program where we are teaching the police officers about great things that African Americans have done, great inventors, great historians, great doctors, lawyers. And when we share that kind of information with the members of our community, and especially our police department, I believe it helps to enhance how the police officers feel about African American males, because there are too many people who feel that African American males are not in the community doing great work. And there are so many past, present, and I know also in the future that we just need to go out and tell the story of what African American males are doing in the city of Mesa, Arizona. When we invite the police officers to our church, we have our men stand up and we salute the great work they are doing in the church, being role models for the young people in our churches. And so I think that we need to continue to focus on activities such as this. There are also East Valley NAACP meetings. Some of our police chiefs and assistant chiefs have come to NAACP meetings and participated. And sometimes I think that we forget to say how much we appreciated the assistant chief or the chief coming to some of the NAACP meetings. Also, some of our police officers have attended the East Valley Freedom Fund banquet. When we have activities like that, when we sit down at the table of brotherhood and break bread together, I believe, deep in my heart, I believe that helps us to get to know each other better. And so that when terrible things happen in the community, that we're able to sit down with those officers and we're able to come up with some resolutions that would be good for everybody involved, so that it's not just, it can be a win-win situation as we seek how we're going to solve that problem. One of the things that I would like to see is that we would recruit more African American police officers. I'm not really sure how many we have in the city of Mesa, but I don't think the number is very high. So one of the things that I would like to see Chief Koss do is work on recruiting some African American young men to come in and help out with our community policing and just to be part of the Mesa Police Department. Also, I think that we should have more of the special meetings that we called African American forums. We should have more of those. Let's not wait until there is a boiling over in the community to come together, but let's continue to have the meetings that we were having quarterly meetings. I believe those were started way back when Chief Gascon was the police chief. And I know that we have not always kept up with those meetings. And I think we need to go back to having those meetings and people bring their concerns. And we walk away feeling that we really are a part of the community, part of the Mesa Police Department, and we're just not icing on the cake, and that we're not just coming there so that people will see the good things that the Mesa Police Department is doing. But I think that we should work on serious problems in the community because there's so many Black men that feel they are picked up driving while Black. Well, it shouldn't be a crime to be picked up just because you're Black. But I know, again, all of the police officers that are doing that, it's just a few. And those we need to make sure that they are given more in-service training so that they will know that we need to do things that will help build a great relationship with the African American men in our community. And sometimes I really feel that African American men are judged more harshly, that if they do a certain crime and if another person who is a Caucasian does that same crime, that our Black men get a harder sentence. That's not something that I can prove. It's just something that I feel because I'm in a society where I hear complaints about that all of the time. So I hope that we will be able to work on problems like that because our men don't want to feel that they're judged more harshly just because of the color of their skin. And we know what Dr. King taught us many years ago. He said, I dream of a day when my little children will be judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. And that's what I feel for our African American men. I dream of a day when they will be judged by the content of their character and not just because they are an African American male in our society. Also, I think that we should continue to even invite our cadets to come into the activities that we have every 3 months. I think we should get them in the mainstream. They should come out to the African American forums and start to participate because after all, the cadets are going to be the police officers who are placed into service. So I think that they need to understand that when we are of a certain culture, we do react in a different manner. And it's not that we are more in control. It's just that there are different things that push our buttons in the society. And I'm not talking about all Black men. I'm talking about my husband, my son-in-law. Yeah. I know what gets on their last nerve. And so these are just some of the things that I, feel that we need to improve upon. But I have loved working with the police officers and have made many good friends. Some of the police officers, I have known them from the time they were a commander to assistant chief, all the way to police chief.
Pastor,
And have made
thank
great
you very much
friendship,
for
but-
sharing. Those are wonderful comments. I'd love to get the chief's reaction to that. And
Okay.
one of my observations, as I watched that horrifying tape of George Floyd, one of the things that struck me is that the police officers that were in that situation were not part of the community. They did not feel connected to the crowd of people that was there. They were strangers. And I mean, but Reverend Kirby brings up an excellent point. What can we do to have a relationship, this community policing relationship that is so desperately needed between communities of color and our police force?
It's a great question. It's good to see you, Reverend Kirby. And it has been my honor to come worship with you in your church. And you've treated me so well over the years, and I appreciate that. I think I might be one of those ones that are growing up in front of you. But seriously, the relationship, and then I'll go into further in the question. The relationship is so key because you can't start when a crisis occurs. You have to get to know what's in someone's heart and what their core values are well before that, and that goes along with our officers as well, because then you know that that's a genuine approach to any of the challenges that we have. In one of my last visits to your church, Dr. Lester was there, and he talked about humanity and Project Humanities, and that really stuck with me because it talked about empathy and compassion and respect. And those are things that we do embed into our recruits from the very beginning because they're the ones walking through the door. So it starts when we recruit, because I want to answer a portion of your question. Over the past 6 years, and I don't have the data to go before 6 years, but I can certainly get that, and we'll be transparent with that. But over the past 6 years, our diversity rate for our academies has been well over 40%. And so that includes, obviously, not only African-American recruits, but also our Hispanic recruits, Asians, female recruits, all of it together. And that's quite a big percentage when you're looking at classes that could be anywhere between 25 and 40 plus officers. So we really put a lot of effort. We've done at least 8 to 10 events specifically related to the African-American community to recruit, and we have not arrived yet. We have to get better. We have a dedicated group of officers that's all they do is work on different ways that we can recruit from every aspect of the community, so we represent the community, and our numbers show that. And I think what you'll see, Reverend Kirby, is over the years you'll start seeing that play out as these officers turn to sergeants, and then they turn from sergeants to lieutenant, and lieutenant to commander. So we have that leadership. But really, remember, the leadership starts with those officers. In the academy, we expose them to culture. They have an entire class right when they graduate where they go to the Alston House. They sit and listen to members of the community talk about every aspect of the community and the history of Mesa to bring them close to the community that they're going to go serve, so they understand that it's important as a department for us that we put that as part of their training before we even allow them to go on the street to learn the field training. And so those are programs that we do that I know are fairly unique, but all we can do is grow that and keep that momentum going and never stop and feel like we've arrived anywhere, because that's just simply not the case. And that's where the officers are going to be responsible for their beat area, for the area that they serve, so they do know the people that they're coming in contact with. And if they see someone on the sidewalk and they're engaging them, they should know their first name. They have phones, they have cards. We want that connectivity with the officers. A lot of our officers have made events happen just on their own, and it's not an officer that's assigned to community policing. They're all assigned to community policing. Everyone that wears this badge, that's the expectation. So I hope that helps answer your question, Reverend Kirby.
Thank you, Reverend Kirby. We appreciate, again, all that you've done for so many years in strengthening the relationship between the African-American community and the Mesa Police Department. And I know you're just getting started, so we appreciate that. Next, I'd like to introduce Ron Williams. Ron is a Desert Storm veteran, but he's also an entrepreneur and businessman in our city. I'm very grateful to Ron for his service as chair of the City of Mesa Human Relations Advisory Board, which is a very diverse board of folks we appoint to a committee to help us to break down barriers in our community and to make sure that we're listening to communities of color. So That's an important position in our community, Ron. We appreciate you taking the leadership of that. Also, all of your efforts in our MLK Day parade and festivals. So, Ron, take it away. We're anxious to hear what you have to share with us.
Well, first, let me say thank you, Mayor, for inviting me to be a part of the Communities of Color Forum, and appreciate Ken Calls, our police chief, being here to participate with us. It's been an honor to be a part of the Human Relations Advisory Board, and just to share with our audience, our mission is to create an inclusive, respectful, and equitable community. Having heard all the panelists today, I will say that it's important. You know, transparency is critical. When events occur in the community with the police department and community members, and the community at large is asking questions, if those questions don't get answered, people will draw their own conclusions. Just like Reverend Kirby mentioned earlier about the community forum, I believe the various stakeholders, community forums that Mesa PD hosts, they really go a long way in building up that trust bank, if you will, with the community. But we also know that that trust bank can be depleted and wiped out with just one act of distrust. So personally, and on behalf of our board, I appreciate the open communications that the Human Relations Advisory Board has with Mesa PD, and Tara and her team. They do a great job of updating us monthly, and we understand the challenges of getting some of the statistics that we've been asking for because of the way some of the activities are reported. We understand that, but we'll continue to do the work with Tara and Mesa PD to work through some of those glitches. I got a couple of questions for you, Chief Cost, about recruitment. We know that when there's a call in the community, if you will, across the country, as well as in Mesa, that the employees of the police force should reflect the ethnic makeup of the communities in which they serve. Let's say that every effort is being made to make that happen, Chief. My question is two-part. How do you monitor those efforts currently? And how will it continue to be monitored as your workforce and the community continues to change?
Great question, sir. So we're a data-driven agency, so we monitor it in real time. So meaning the amount of applicants who show up for the test, and the amount of applicants who pass each phase of our testing process. And we do it, and it's broken down by both gender and the race of the applicant. So we can track that, and we can identify trends that are starting to peak or to go to an area where we know that we have to make an adjustment in what we do. And so that process improvement is consistent. So I talked about the numbers, for example, for the last 6 years. Those are all numbers I'm speaking of based on that robust system we put in place, and whether it's purchasing some software to make us better and to track better, or using our analysts that we have within the organization to do that. That's how we make sure that we're hitting that mark in recruitment to reflect our community. So, you know, whether it's the last 6 years, it's an average of 25.6% Hispanic recruits when our community is, I think, just over 30. Then we know that we're in that range of a recruitment that matches our community. The African American community, we're everybody get out, everybody make sure that you complete the census. Okay, shameless plug. But the African American community of last census was about 3.5%. We know that that's changed. We're about at a 4.7, 4.8% recruitment for African American candidates to go into our academy. So we know we're in that percentage, but we're going to constantly monitor what's going on, the population changes and demographics, to make sure we're using that data-driven approach and everything beyond that approach to make sure that we're hitting the mark recruiting-wise, sir.
Thank you, Ken, for that answer. I just have one more question for you, Chief. When recruiting, would you say that the Mesa Police Department have processes in place to ensure that you're not recruiting and bringing into your ranks problem officers, if you will, that have transferred in from other municipalities with either a bad record of complaints and or have been fired and or have resigned under suspicious circumstances. Can you talk about that?
Yes, absolutely. We have a process in place, sir, that it's our background process. So anybody who wants to come here from, say, ABC Police Department in Arizona and they want to transfer into the Mesa Police Department, we do the same thorough review on them and their file and their history, and talking to coworkers, not just supervisors, talking to people within the community on how they feel about that officer before we bring them on. So we're very strict on that. We don't just say you were an officer in another area and we're going to bring you on. Are we perfect? Absolutely not. There's no way to sit here and be honest and say that we're perfect and that we haven't had an issue here or there with somebody we brought in from another agency, but it's pretty rare, and we do have a robust process in place.
Well, I appreciate you answering those questions, Chief. And going forward, just if you get the opportunity to share those processes in a transparent manner with the community when those opportunities present themselves, I think it'll, of course, go a long way in the other efforts that you're making to connect PD with community. So thank you for answering my question.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Ron. I'm sorry that our time with Judge Sears was cut short.
Mayor, I'm on the line.
Thank you, Judge Sears. Please continue. I'm sorry that we cut you short earlier.
It's not your fault. My phone is overheating, and that's the reason why I kept cutting off. So I turned off my video so you can just get me on audio.
Sure.
But what I was saying, the heart of the matter is that George Floyd's death was over $20. He was accused of attempting to pass a counterfeit $20 bill, and the business's policy was if you see a counterfeit bill or suspect there is a counterfeit bill, you are to call the police. And so the young woman who called the police, she's a young African-American woman, and she also, unfortunately, ended up videotaping the video that we saw worldwide. And the fact of the matter is that, this is $20. So let's talk about money. One of my issues is that I'm a citizen of Mesa. I'm a public servant, like many of you. And we had a very, very high profile case that also went worldwide. And that officer was later fired, and he was rehired to the Mesa Police Department. And my tax dollars are currently going towards his pension. I find that very problematic. So one of my questions is, what is being done as far as discipline financially? Because it's one thing to lose your job, but if you're just going to be hired back to the same place where you did the bad deed, albeit on desk duty, that's not justice. So that's one question I have. Another statement I'd like to make is that based on everything I've seen in my life, I decided to establish a scholarship fund for Black students who would like to go into criminal justice, legal studies, law school, etc. Because the fact of the matter is that the people in power, like myself as an elected judge, need to reflect the community in which it serves. So my question to you, Chief, is what is the Mesa Police Department doing financially to help the Black community?
Really good questions. So I'll start with that. Unfortunately, with what's going on with COVID, a lot of the events that we've supported through our community leaders and whether it's a fundraising event or whether it's supporting like the Thurgood Marshall lunch or the different things that we can either physically attend or we can support financially. We've done so, and we work through our forums and our community engagement division with Ms. Tara Hall. And if you haven't met her, Judge, then I want to make sure to link you two up because we do heavily support a lot of the variety of community events and community leaders that way. So that's the one portion of the question. Your original question as far as what discipline for the officers, and you mentioned the prior incident. The prior incident ended up being more of a human resources question versus the police department, and the fact that our discipline moving forward, and even at that point, is based on what happened at the time. There's a lot of things in between, like whether it's the Police Officer Bill of Rights or human relations sort of things that we probably would need to get offline to talk about, Judge, as far as that particular incident goes. But I can tell you, moving forward and the things that we have in place, our discipline policy includes everything from written reprimand to training on the lower end, all the way to a suspension without pay, to include possible termination. So it just depends on the level, the level of the violation, and then the officers have due process and they have their rights and they go through that process, and we respect that.
Chief, if I could just
thank you, Chief.
And Judge Shears, you may recall this, the incident you're referring to, Chief Mesa at the time terminated that officer immediately, and then the county attorney's office brought murder charges. And as the chief indicated, and as you can appreciate as a judge, Your Honor, the due process process took place and ran its course, and we dealt with the consequences of that. And so some of these issues are complex, and there's the folks on both sides of these questions have legal rights that need to be respected. I know that, as the chief indicated earlier, we've tried to, the chief and the city have tried to do what we can to take a lot of the delay and a lot of the red tape out of the process that we see involved in police officer discipline. And the chief mentioned earlier some progress that we've been making on that. Not to say that it's perfect. It needs to be better than it is. I think we acknowledge that. That this is going forward, one of the issues that we need to get better at.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Your Honor. Chief, thank you for your time, and folks, thank you for participating both by viewing this broadcast, and also by participating live. Chief, I'd like to give you an opportunity to maybe say anything else that you feel that you didn't get the opportunity to share with the community, things that are important to you at this time. Yeah,
I think it's important for the community, and I talk about this a lot, not just the Mesa community, but all the community in Arizona and throughout the country, but especially for our Mesa citizens and the folks that are on. You have a police department of men and women that are dedicated to protect you, to stand by you, to be with you, to work with you. That culture has been established. Are we going to be perfect every time? Absolutely not. That's why we have these relationships. And I promise you that the men and women that are out there every day, right this second, putting their life on the line, will continue to get better as we move forward. We will continue to have conversations that aren't just conversations, they're progress. Talk is one thing, you're gonna see progress, and that's what I can guarantee that you'll see from the Mesa Police Department moving forward and our relationship together as we learn. So I really appreciate and respect everything every single one of you said. I'm listening loud and clear. I stand with you. And we stand together on making significant change. And I know I'll be talking to you soon. God bless each one of you.
Thank you, Chief. Well, I hope that those who participated today came away with a sense that the City of Mesa wants to be held accountable for having a very good police department. We want to be held accountable for having state-of-the-art policies and procedures when it comes to performing this very important social function that we have as a city government. So I want to just add my commitment and the commitment of the City of Mesa administration and elected officials that we see this time in our country and in our community as a watershed moment. I hope that none of us think that this is just business as usual and something that occurs every few years that we talk about and then we put back on the shelf. Shame on us if we allow that to happen. So for that to happen, we need the community to continue to be engaged and to hold us accountable, to ask hard questions. We had some of those discussed today, but this is not done. This is not mission accomplished. This is going to be an ongoing process for our community to uphold the social obligation that we have to our citizens to provide professional and constitutional policing in our community. So I know that that's the desire of our police department and of the leadership of our community. So this is not the last time we're going to do this. As I indicated, I've asked Council Member David Luna to have a similar program to this, hopefully next week, that will include additional communities of color, so that we can make sure that we're listening to all the voices in our community that want to weigh in on these and other important issues. But again, thank you for your time today. I'll remind you, we're still in the midst of a severe economic crisis. We're in the midst of a severe health crisis, and now in the midst of a severe civil rights crisis. So these are challenging times. So please do all you can. Let's take good care of each other and particularly be mindful of our at-risk seniors. Thank you very much.